Hello and welcome to our guide for the Fallen Protectors, the second boss in the Siege of Orgrimmar. There are 3 bosses in this encounter and you have to fight all 3 of them at the same time. They do not share health and they must all be killed in the space of 10 seconds or else they heal each other. In addition to each boss's set of 3 abilities, they have a special phase called Desperate Measures that they enter at 66 and 33% health. When this happens, that boss disappears and summons a number of adds. When the adds die, the boss comes back. Rook Stonetoe's first ability is Vengeful Strikes. This is a stun that he casts on his tank, which he then follows up with a very damaging frontal cone attack. You don't need a tank switch for this ability, but make sure that Rook is facing away from other raid members. Rook's second ability is Corrupted Brew, a Shadow Crash type mechanic. Rook throws brew kegs at random ranged raid members, which deal damage in a 5-yard area when they land, also slowing affected players. Everyone should avoid the corrupted brew projectiles. They move quite slowly and the targeted area on the ground is clearly indicated. Rook's third ability is Clash, which he casts on random raid members, charging them. He immediately follows this up with Corruption Kick, which deals damage in a 10-yard area for 4 seconds. Players who are hit by Corruption Kick also have a dot placed on them. Move away from Rook whenever he clashes a player and dispel anyone affected by the dot. When Rook enters Desperate Measures, he disappears and summons 3 adds: Embodied Misery, Embodied Sorrow, and Embodied Gloom. Each add has its own ability. Embodied Misery casts Defiled Ground on her tank, knocking them back, dealing damage to them, and placing a damaging void zone at their location. Embodied Sorrow casts Inferno Strike. He selects a random raid member and then, a few seconds later, deals a massive amount of damage split between all players within 8 yards of that player. Embodied Gloom casts Corruption Shock, an interruptible AoE nuke. You should tank Embodied Misery out of the raid. Make sure to move out of any void zones she creates. The entire raid should stack on the player targeted by Inferno Strike and Corruption Shock should be interrupted. He Softfoot's first ability is Gouge, which he casts on his tank, incapacitating them for 6 seconds and changing target to a random raid member. If the tank is facing away from He when Gouge is cast, then they are only knocked back a short distance but not incapacitated, and he doesn't change targets. He's second ability is Garrote, a bleed with an unlimited duration that he places on random raid members. It can't be dispelled, but it's automatically removed from all raid members when he enters Desperate Measures. You will just have to heal through the damage of this bleed. He's third ability is comprised of 2 self-buffs that he alternates using. Noxious Poison causes his melee attacks to leave behind damaging void zones, and Instant Poison causes his melee attacks to do a lot of extra nature damage. You have to kite him around when he's creating void zones, and the extra damage is just something that tanks and healers have to get through with cooldowns. When he enters Desperate Measures, he disappears and summons an add called Embodied Anguish. This add fixates on a random raid member, rooting them in place and dealing shadow damage to them every second in addition to his melee attacks. The player who the Embodied Anguish is fixated on has an extra action button that allows them to pass on the fixate and everything that goes with it, including the root effect and the shadow damage dot, to a targeted raid member. The easiest way to handle this ability is to have the fixate given to one of the tanks, who should be able to survive until the Embodied Anguish is killed. The tank will suffer an armor reduction, but this should still not be enough to make them unable to survive. Sun Tenderheart's first ability is Shah Seer, a channeled spell that deals damage to a random raid member and all players within 5 yards of them. You can interrupt this spell, but there is no point in doing that since she will just recast it on a different player. Instead, whoever is targeted by this should make sure to stand away from other raid members. Sun's second ability is Shadow Word Bane, a dot that she applies on random raid members. The dot spreads to new players each time it ticks, but it can be dispelled. You should dispel it when you can, but this is not a major concern since all Shadow Word Banes are automatically removed each time Sun casts her third ability, Calamity. Calamity damages every raid member for 30% of their maximum health as shadow damage. When Sun enters Desperate Measures, she disappears and summons two adds called Embodied Despair and Embodied Desperation. These adds deal constant raid-wide damage and don't do anything else, but fortunately there is a protective barrier in the center of the arena which reduces the damage taken by anyone standing in it. Adds called Despair and Desperation Spawns spawn from random raid members, and any damage taken by these adds is also copied to the players from whom they spawned. Basically, your raid should stack inside the protective barrier, while ranged DPS players kill the Embodied Despair and Embodied Desperation, and melee players kill the spawns. While dealing with each ability on its own is quite simple, some pretty nasty combinations can happen and you're going to have to react promptly to these. For example, if Rook starts casting Corruption Kick inside the protective barrier from Sun's Desperate Measures, everyone will need to run out. Likewise, if Sun channels Shassier on a player who is stacking with the raid for Inferno Strike, that player will need to run out. For a more detailed and constantly updated written version of this guide, go to the link in the description. Thank you for watching.